everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Indexer Office Hours. Today is the 23rd of August, and this is IOH 73. So if anyone is new to Indexer Office Hours, today is a conversation that will be broken down into 4 segments. The first section is opening remarks, where we speak about GRTIQ and any other related news. Then we will be speaking about Repo Watch, which is the latest updates to the most important repos you need to keep an eye on as an indexer. And then we will have a section on Protocol Watch, which is all of the latest information and updates to the protocol that you need to be aware of as an indexer. And then finally, we'll have an open discussion where we generally have a member of the community to discuss a particular topic, and then we have an open discussion about all of that. And as part of that section, we love participation, so if you'd like to get involved in a conversation, feel free to unmute your mic at that time and contribute, as we do love all types of input. So before I get into opening remarks, I want to hand it to Nick to share some very exciting news with us today.
Hey, thanks a lot, Abel, in making sure everyone can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. Thanks, Abel. So, hey, everybody. My name is Nick. I'm with the Graph Foundation. Most of you probably noticed last night, the Graph official Twitter account dropped some exciting news. A countdown in 2 days. The next chain beyond Ethereum is going to be announced. So the Graph is welcoming a web multi-chain future with some exciting announcements. And I'm sure all of you will be paying attention and seeing what the next chain is. In anticipation of some of this news and getting the community more involved, I'm excited also to announce that the foundation and members of the community here are going to host a special Indexer Office Hours next week, where we'll be providing an overview of how you can become an indexer. So if you're somebody who has been wondering, how do I become an indexer? What is the process? How can I get involved? Next week's Indexer Office Hours will be geared towards that. So we expect some announcements within the community to draw more people in. And if you have questions or want to take that jump, next week's Indexer Office Hours will be an important one to join. So put it on your calendars, talk to your friends, anybody in the ecosystem that's ever discussed this idea, and we'll see you here next week. Thanks, Abel.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Nick. Well, you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. It is going to be a very exciting Index Office Hours next week. So make sure you put it in your calendars and let all your friends and family know if they have dreams and hopes of becoming an indexer too. Wonderful. So let's head into opening remarks. So this week's GRTIQ episode was with 𝗀𝗀𝗄𝗃 𝗟𝗂, who is a partner at Republic. And Republic is an investment firm focused on startups, gaming, real estate, and crypto. And this podcast was focused on her journey and how she got into crypto. She has a background in studying film at NYU, which is quite interesting. And the conversation generally talks about gaming, virtual reality, and Republic, and how they are a different venture firm as opposed to other ones in the field. So if you're interested in any of those fields, gaming, virtual reality, crypto, please do check out that episode. Without further ado, now I will hand it over to Anna to take us into Repo Watch.
Thank you, Abel, and hello everyone. Welcome to Repo Watch. As always, all of the links to the release notes and the PRs that will be mentioning can be found in the agenda. And I want to remind you that we have updated the flow to only mention the clients that have had a new release. Okay, so going back into major blockchain clients. So on Aragon version 2, last week we talked about this new release, so 2022-08-02 alpha. It dropped as we were in IOH, so I won't cover it again, but I've updated the agenda to contain that release. I know a lot of you have already tried it, and so that's for Aragon. On Streaming Fast Get, we have had 2 new releases, so both on Get, so version 1.10.21 for Firehose 2.4 and 2.3. We have also had a major new release for Get, so that's version 1.10.22. And before I tell you some of the changes, This release comes with a big warning. It contains a regression that can corrupt the local state. So hold on trying this release, but this will be a big release. So some of the changes on that release are the log filtering system now uses a cache that speeds up the repeated queries for the same block range. And you can configure the cache side with a flag. Then we also have it create access list is now much more faster. It fee history works with finalized block specified, and one change that would be quite interesting is the built-in call tracer now supports an option for only top call. And what this means is that the tracer will skip internal call, so that so on the Go library changes, the storage of trinodes hash-tree images is now disabled by default. It client now supports it fee history. The RPC server supports a new option for reader header timeout. And that's about that are the big changes for this particular release. This release is built on Go 1.18.5. I will not ask anyone about trying this release because, again, this comes with a warning. It contains a regression that can corrupt your local state. So until we have an update on this, please do not try it. And that's all we had on the major blockchain clients. On the graph stack, we haven't had any new releases since last week. So I will now like to invite you to share with us if anyone has had any experiences, good or bad, with any of the current versions of any of the clients that you are using.
Well, we're using the latest version of 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗳𝗂𝗃 here at 𝗨𝘀𝗧𝗏. We've had no problems with it. It's been running steady as a rock.
Thank you so much, Kyle. I'm glad to hear that. Anyone else? Anything to share? I will take that as a no, and I will hand over to you, Juan. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Okay, cool. Let's get into protocol watch. We have a ton to cover today, so yeah. First of all, forum governance, GIP34, we have the graph arbitrum deployment with new rewards issuance and distribution mechanism. The first audits, the first reports from the audits are being reviewed by the team. So there's a lot of contract implementation upgrades that are being merged and created, which we will get to them afterwards in the contracts repository category. There's also some discussion in the chain identification and aliasing for the graph protocol thread, which has to do with the CIP2 IDs for the EVO, basically, and how we're going to be using those and aliases for the older aliases used in the manifests for the subgraph development. Then we get into GIP30, the minimum curation amount for indexing rewards eligibility. This is a GIP that was merged, and there was a bug found later when it was on production. It got halted and reverted, I think, and there's an update basically updating on the potential solutions for that bug. Some of them are unfeasible within Solidity code, so yeah, we are basically exploring solutions. Also, there's a super important I would say thread here, which is the indexing rewards and the merge, how they will interact with each other. Given that the merge will change how many blocks are produced, the indexer rewards are basically calculated on a block per block basis. So there needs to be some modification to keep the target inflation to 3%. Please, if you have any feedback, it will be greatly appreciated to follow that up in the forum post. Now getting into forum research, we have GIP. Well, it's without a number, but it's basically liquid delegation tokens. I think there have been many discussions about liquid delegations. This is a new GIP that was proposed in the forum research category in the forums. It basically goes over how liquid delegation tokens are super useful, but it does require, and it does says that it requires a lot of changes within the core protocol. So not entirely sure about that, but it could potentially be also an external, an extra protocol improvement in a sense, which is the question that Zach actually asked in that forum post. So if you have any feedback for the liquid delegation tokens post, please go ahead and go into the forums. Now into the contracts repository, there's a ton of changes that are related to the audit reports. Most of them are from the audit reports for the L2 scaling GIP 34. So we are not going to go into all of the details, but it's basically mostly that, as well as some automatic bumping of versions on the packages. And on the network subgraphs, we have no new releases in last IOH. So we'll go ahead and go towards the open discussion. I'll pass it on to you, Abel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And before we get into the open discussion section of today's conversation, Juan mentioned it and also Anna mentioned it. The merge is coming up. We will talk more about what that means for you as indexers later in today's conversation if we have time. But just want to flag that this is important, and there will be things that as indexers you guys will have to do to stay up to date. So with that, let's move into the open discussion section. So we're very fortunate today to have Derek, Chris, and Juan to talk to us all about the Cobb-Douglas production function, what it is, how it's used in the graph protocol, and how it affects indexers. And so with that, I will invite all of them to chat to that. So Juan, do you want to take it away with the first section?
Sure. Thanks, Abel. So many of you have probably already heard about the Cobb-Douglas production function. Many of you, especially those that were around since mission control, because it was one of the most discussed topics back then. There were also some query fee dynamics study groups, so some of you might already know this, but query fees in the network are not like straightforward, just the consumer pays a set amount of GRT and that's distributed and that's it. The value flows of query fees are slightly complex. The first part of it goes through a taxing period, like the 1% protocol tax, then it gets distributed to curators. But then we get to the nitty gritty of what happens when it gets to the split between indexers and delegators, and how it's also delayed so that the query disputes can happen. And everything kind of like falls into the same data structure. So basically, after splitting with the protocol tax and the curation royalties, we deposit those collected query fees into the rebate pools. You might have heard of this. And the rebate pools is basically the data structure where the Cobb-Douglas function will be triggered. It's triggered on claim, but basically that's where all of the inputs for the Cobb-Douglas function are taken from. The idea of the rebate pools, there are many reasons why we have the rebate pools. One of the reasons, as I already mentioned, we need to have like a separation between the collection point and the claiming point, so that query disputes can happen. But we also want to incentivize a few things, which is why we have the Cobb-Douglas production function. What the Cobb-Douglas production function wants to do is to have some mechanism that is outside of the indexing rewards, where indexers are incentivized to actually stake into their allocation, so have the allocation stake proportional to the amount of query traffic that they are expecting, so the amount of query fees that they are going to be settling on chain. And the idea is that without indexing rewards, people can just allocate one GRT, and they have no incentive to provide economic security, because if query fees are the only revenue source, right? There's no reason why you would want to put more than one GRT on your allocations, right? Like the minimum amount should be enough as long as you can have exposure to those query fees. This is obviously just without even considering that there's also indexer selection algorithms in the gateways and yada, yada, yada. But if you kind of like remove that from the picture, you have no other incentive. So the 𝗀 function kind of like steps in to allow some other extra incentive so that you allocate your stake accordingly to the different subpairs that you want to be serving queries for. The production function basically just sets some weights so that it processes the queries that you collected, compares that to what everyone else collected during the same epoch, because rebate pools are one per epoch. And based on that, and also the total amount of the stake of other people, it gives you a score, which is basically it's the proportion of rebates that you're gonna get. So if you, let's say you collected 100 GRT, and after the production it says that you need to get 97 GRT, you're gonna get 97 GRT, and that's pretty much it. So the idea is that it weights the amount of stake that you have compared to everyone else, with also the amount of query fees that you collected compared to everyone else, and then it gives you a score compared to everyone else, and it basically redistributes everything. A few things to notice from this function is that under certain circumstances, maybe most of the allocations that are close are under the optimal staking efficiency range. So we call staking efficiency this kind of like comparison of the weights against everyone else. So if you're outside of that range on the, let's say, the bad side, you're going to get sort of like penalized in a sense. So you're going to get less GRT out of the function than you initially put in. But if you are more optimally staked, you're going to get a little bit more. So it's kind of like it goes both ways. But in some cases, the amount of allocations that are under that optimal range lead to a few percentages of GRT being burned in a few of the rebate pools, because after everyone processes their rebates, there might be some GRT that is left, and that GRT that is left, it's burned. So that's pretty much the whole idea of the 𝗀-Douglas. Again, it's mostly just to incentivize staking accordingly, given that we also have indexing rewards and we also have the indexer selection algorithm in the gateways. There are other incentives to stake correctly, and there are other ways to optimize your stake correctly. It really depends on what you're optimizing for, if you're optimizing for indexing rewards or if you're optimizing for query fees, the way that you will optimize your stake in each of your allocations. But that's pretty much it. If there were no indexing rewards, of course, the way that you would allocate would more likely reflect the amount of query fee traffic that you're expected to, or you're expecting to be settling on chain, if that makes any sense. Do you want to take it forward, Derek?
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys might hear my daughter laughing in the background. She's having fun. But there's a couple of there's a couple of things that I wanted to highlight on this topic, because I more recently started to deep dive this, especially now that the network is seeing more query volume on the mainnet. I know that it hasn't really been a priority on our end quite yet, but now that we're starting to see some traffic, it obviously will play a factor. And there's kind of there's a couple of interesting dynamics in that everyone's efficiency with how they're allocating does kind of affect every other indexer. So that was another reason why I wanted to bring it up in in an IOH environment, is that the more, or I should say, the better that we all do, the better that we're all rewarded on this. So again, Juan mentioned a lot of these points, but just to kind of highlight a couple of specific mechanics that I found to be really interesting while going through this, is that the rebate pool, so all the GRT that we that we collect off of our receipts, the rebate pool is specific to one epoch. And so an interesting point on this is, based off of when you close your allocation, that's going to affect the end-all rebates that you get. And I touch on this because I've seen some interesting activity, and maybe maybe
because of how low query fees are compared to indexing rewards at this time. But there were a few times where people would close allocations right after others were closing allocations, and stacking all their rebates into a single epoch, and then the following epoch there was nothing closed. And so that's activity that I guess should be expected at this point in the life cycle of query fees being added. But yeah, I thought that was something that was interesting to note. So we've started to kind of take an eye on, or to keep an eye out on, when are other indexers closing their allocations, especially if we have an allocation that we're expecting some good rebates on. So that's one thing I wanted to highlight. A couple of points, and with the Cobb-Douglas formula itself, it gets very mathematical very quickly, and it's easy to get buried underneath the math. But I think the most simple way of understanding it is, as Juan mentioned, it's kind of a weighted system. So you have a certain amount of weight based off of your stake, and then a certain amount of weight based off of the query fees that your allocation produced. And that stake weight, it's not just your stake amount; it's your stake amount times the number of epochs that it was open, and that'd be called your effective allocation. So if you were to have we'll just say a 1 million GRT allocation open for one day, and you produced 1,000 GRT in query fees, that would be an incredible allocation. But I'm more highlighting this just because the math on a 1 day allocation is different than the math on a 28-day allocation or 28 epoch allocation. So I just wanted to highlight some of those components as you guys are keeping an eye on your systems. And then we also did a couple of tests. More of sometimes when we're first learning how to interact with a new part of the protocol. In this case, the Cobb-Douglas formula, we started doing things that were possibly unintelligent, just to kind of see what the result would be. And if you guys go to GraphScan, you can look at some of our past allocations, but we did allocate 1 GRT to a couple of known query producing subgraphs. And the results of that were pretty interesting in that we collected, I think it was 600 GRT during that allocation lifecycle, but the end-all rebate came out to like 13 GRT. So very, very small percentage, because it was so unoptimized. And it was unoptimized in by having not enough stake compared to the amount of query fees that we produce. And looking at the way that the Cobb-Douglas formula works, you kind of have a quote-unquote penalty if you're not staking enough GRT on your allocation. And then at a certain point, you're not necessarily penalized for having too much stake, but there might be a capital inefficiency if there's other subgraphs that you could be allocating to maintain that high the highest ratio possible. So one thing that we're gonna start doing is keeping an eye on what is the like a general ratio between query fees produced per epoch and then the total effective stake for that epoch, just so we can kind of get an idea of what is the rebate pool factoring. And we were noticing that initially that ratio fluctuates pretty dramatically right now, and largely because it's not really the forefront of all of our income. But as that progresses, we'll probably share that with others, just to have some eyes on, okay, well, what is the protocol kind of figuring out as the optimum stake amount, and how does that look? And over time, I think we would all expect that to kind of tighten a little bit more. But yeah, just wanted to kind of share some of the test cases that we've done, and some of the research that we've done to help other people, because the better we are all doing, the better it is for everyone. So with that, I guess, Chris, is there anything that you'd like to add on that one?
No, I think you and Juan have covered it pretty well. It can be a difficult mechanism to kind of grok in the beginning. I certainly took a bit of time to understand it or gain some intuition for it. Actually, we spoke yesterday about this, and I realized that I had some misunderstandings about it. So, I guess one thing that I would say is that there's this interesting kind of pro-social outcome with the Cobb-Douglas function, and that is that the function will burn the least amount of GRT when all of the indexers in the rebate pool effectively have roughly the same ratio of effective stake or effective allocation to query fee ratios. So like if everybody in the pool stakes roughly the same amount of tokens proportionately to the number of query fees that they serve proportionately, like if that's the same, and that's the same for everyone in the pool, then the pool will burn the least amount of GRT, and it's kind of the best outcome for everyone. So we kind of, if we work together to optimize for that outcome, we can actually get more earnings from the rebate pool collectively.
Yeah, effectively, if everyone stakes exactly in the same proportion within the same rebate pool, it's as if the Cobb-Douglas function is not there. So you get the same that you input it. Basically, there's no minting, of course. It just doesn't mint extra. So if no one's losing, no one's also gaining. So it's effectively as not having it. This is, of course, extremely difficult because you don't only have to balance it yourself. Everyone else has to balance it and optimize it properly. Because if someone is extremely overly allocated, it will pretty much injure everyone else in the same rebate pool, unfortunately. But yeah, that's pretty much how it's working right now. That's a super interesting question, Vince. How do we optimize for that outcome on a new subgraph when query volume is relatively unknown? Well, I don't have a good answer for that, but it is one of the major challenges. Optimizing that stake is not simple at all, compared to obviously optimizing your allocations for indexing rewards, which is quite straightforward. Optimizing for unknown amounts of query volume. And it's also not the query volume itself, because it might be a small query volume, but if the queries themselves are priced higher, that changes the equation basically, because it's the amount of GRT collected that is used within the formula. So it's not just the volume itself. Of course, the volume should be kind of like aligned with the GRT, but if people are pricing the pricing of those queries are heavily all around the place, it's not it's even more difficult to optimize for.
Yeah, I would also say that, especially in the new stages of a subgraph, or even if it's a subgraph that you've never allocated to, you won't necessarily know. And yeah, it's definitely one of the challenges of you don't have the data that you need to be able to efficiently, optimize your stake amount for an allocation until after you've had at least one allocation to that subgraph. And even then, on your second allocation, things can change. If there's less indexers on it, you might be getting more query fees. And so there's definitely challenges that come along with the production function. But yeah, just trying to understand more aspects of it is something that I think will lead to each of us being able to rebate more from, or be able to collect more rebates. I don't know what the proper verb of that would be. Rebate more GRT.
Yeah, maybe just to optimize the rebates for everyone, I guess. But yeah, that's pretty much the point. There's a nice question from Kai about if there are any research articles that one can read, which goes over the 𝗀𝗧 production function. There's also a distinction that I want to make here, is that the research and mathematically oriented articles for the 𝗀𝗧 production function are not entirely one-to-one related to how it's implemented, because of course we just cannot implement the production function exactly how it's supposed to be implemented because of solidity restrictions. So the way that it works right now, it's everyone's depositing everything into the same rebate pool. There's no splits. There's no there's no splits per subgraph. There are some other considerations, but yeah, it's not exactly the same as you might be reading in research articles, because there are some solidity limitations that we also need. I mean, you just cannot compute some stuff on chain without breaking the bank, in a sense.
For anyone curious, Chris has posted a link to a visualization of the curve, which could be quite helpful to grasp all of this stuff.
Are there any other questions that people have on the Cobb-Douglas function and how it works in our protocol?
If there are none, I can probably go over a small spreadsheet that I have, which kind of like shows how it works right now, and kind of like displays some of the on-chain data.
Yeah, let's do it.
Just let me know when everyone can actually see it.
I can see it.
Yeah, same.
Awesome. So basically what we can see here is that this is a spreadsheet. I love doing spreadsheet, it seems. Every time that I present something, it's always a spreadsheet. But we can see here, this is a small sample from the epoch 584 with the correct alpha set, which is the current alpha that's being used in the production function. And we can see a few things. For example, I don't know if the font size is high enough, but hopefully you can see it. On the right side of it, you can see there are some projections that pretty much just are the totals, the total rebates that have been processed and the unclaimed or burned amounts. As we can see, 22% of the GRT that was deposited, it's getting burned, or it's either burned or unclaimed. Whenever there's no one left to claim and there's still GRT left, the unclaimed amount becomes burned, but basically it's the same thing. And as we can see, only 77.3% of the GRT that was deposited into the rebate pool was taken out as a rebate. And we can also see the profit and losses of each of the different allocations. I mean, all of the allocations compete against each other, so there might be allocations that are from the same indexer. There are some of them are slightly better than other ones because some indexers might have had more optimal allocations in some subgraphs than others. But it's basically each of the allocations. You can see that it has an amount that it collected at first. Also the Cobb-Douglas score, the query rebates, and we can also calculate the profit and losses from the differences between the original query fees collected and the query rebates that got out of the Cobb-Douglas function. Another thing that we can see is that even if you generated, and I think, Derek, some of these allocations might actually be the ones that you were describing, because there are a few of which are only 28 GRT allocated, effective allocation,
Yep,
I mean.
looks like it.
So as you can see, some of those actually produce a lot of GRT, but only rebated a little bit. Like on line 27, we can see there's one that has 28 effective allocation, which means it's one GRT allocation that lasted for 28 epochs. Most likely, it could also be a 28 GRT allocation that only lasted for one, but and it generated 1,000, almost 2,000 GRT, but only rebated 50 GRT. This is because it's extremely under the optimal staking efficiency curve. As you can see, some of the other allocations, for example, the last one, which has like a 400 million GRT effective allocation, produced 1,000 GRT. So if we compare the 28 GRT allocation to that one, it has a lot lower economic security, even if it generated almost twice the query fee amount. So of course, given how Cobb-Douglas production function works and how these values are being the inputs for the function are here, we can see that, for example, the 400 million effective allocation, effective stay allocation, actually rebated 364 GRT extra than it actually inputted, because it had a lot higher economic security. Of course, this is not even optimal for that 400 million allocation, because most likely it could also get maybe not 364 more GRT on the rebates, but maybe it got like 0 GRT extra, but only really needed to stake, let's say, I don't know, like maybe 50 million instead of 400 million. And those extra millions of GRT could be used for other important allocations in other different rebate pools, right? So even if it got more rebates than it actually inputted as collected, it's still pretty inefficient because it might have not needed that much GRT for that matter. And the same happens with everyone else, but those are like the two most extreme cases. And we can also change the alpha with this tool and kind of like play around and see what the values are basically for all of the other participants if we move the alpha around. And let's remember that the alpha is basically the portion of the weight that the query fees collected themselves have over the function. So the higher the alpha, the more prominent the amount of query fees that you inputted into the rebate pool are towards the query fee rebates. So if we change the alpha to 95, as you can see, the 400 million allocation actually only really profited 70 GRT, while the 28 GRT allocation that made almost 2K actually got out a little bit less than half of the amount that it produced. So it's a lot closer now than what it was before, and we only really just changed the alpha. This is something that governance can change, by the way. It's not something set in stone. It's not 77 forever. But here you can see how it basically plays out if you just move the parameters around a little bit. We can also see that the burned amount on the right is a lot lower than it was before, because basically the optimal staking efficiency part of the curve is a lot wider now, because if the alpha increases, it's basically making it more optimal for everyone else. Pretty much if you move the alpha to 1, it's basically removing Cobb-Douglas. If you move the alpha to 0, it's also basically removing Cobb-Douglas, but giving it distributing the rewards based on stake alone, in a sense. So it's basically whoever has more stake will get more GRT. Does that help with the visualization of the Cobb-Douglas distributions?
Yeah, I think so. And if I may, the general sentiment that I'm seeing in the chat is that this is quite dense and quite a lot of information to take in. If I may, it'd be great to kind of like make this a bit more actionable for folks. And I guess the general sentiment that we're going for here is just stake more efficiently, because it will help you and other indexes in the network. But beyond that, Chris and Derek, do you have any more practical advice for how indexers can take this information and make it actionable?
Yeah, and I think from an action standpoint, it's something that I mainly want to make people aware of, because again, with the current ratio of indexing rewards to query fees, it's probably more economically rational to optimize your allocations towards indexer rewards. But as we start seeing more and more query fees on the mainnet, this is it's an important aspect to understand as we're making that transition. So that's kind of one thing that I want to bring to light, is just a greater understanding. That way we all kind of know what to do. But then also, it kind of answers the question of, maybe you collected 3,000 GRT amongst your allocations, but you were only able to withdraw 1,500 from the rebate pool, and it will help explain why that might be. But I would say for those that are wanting to start to optimize their allocations more for query fees, even starting now, is just kind of looking at both, at the end of each epoch, what was added to that epoch's rebate pool, which allocations, or what the total effective stake is for that epoch, and that can give you a bit of a clue into whether you want to close your allocation now, or you want to wait and kind of risk the closing it in the next epoch. If you're right at the kind of the end of an epoch, you can kind of straddle between two different epochs and determine which one might be better. So those are things that I wanted to start putting people's attention on as we get closer and closer to a more query-driven mainnet.
Yeah,
Totally.
exactly. Yeah, I just want to echo that this is this is a topic that we want to share with people to get ahead of before the Q1 of 2023, when the hosted service will be deprecated, and it'll be a different game. So hopefully this is helpful. Keep the questions coming. I see some typing in the chat.
One thing too that I wanted to point out in that spreadsheet one, those were not all of my all four of those were not all of my allocations, but you'll notice that on one of the 28 GRT effective stake allocations, it caps out. Sorry, let me rewind a little bit. Your effective allocation, which is your allocation stake times the number of epochs that it was open, that caps out at that 28 epoch limit. And so if you were to have an allocation that's open for 30 epochs, you're only going to get to benefit from 28 epochs of your allocation. And I know that in some of the indexer channels, there's been some confusion in times of the past, and I know I've had this confusion of, what happens if an indexer keeps their allocation open 29 epochs or 30 epochs or more than that? Like, how does that actually affect their income? And from an indexer reward portion, that will obviously continue to accumulate, but on a query fee side, they're not going to be able to benefit from their staked amount, since it caps at that 28 epoch marker.
Yeah, they'll only benefit for the 28 first epoch, while they will still generate query fees. It does put them into a more delicate situation within the rebate pool, because they will not have, even if they stake correctly, if they gone over the 28 epoch limit, their staking intensity will slowly decrease as they generate more and more query fees, basically. There's also something noteworthy to say, that we are constantly monitoring this. So if the 𝗀-Douglas function is starting to behave kind of like unfairly, or if we detect that it might just need an alpha change or something else, we can always do that. We can also implement fixes or changes to the formula. This is how it currently behaves. But yeah, as we progress to a more query feed driven economy, This is kind of like the primary place where like the changes for a more fair distribution will come. That's quite a decent question, Stake Machine. What is the effect of daily whale reallocations for smaller indexers? Unfortunately, whales do move the staking efficiency a lot. This is something that we originally discussed in the query fee dynamic study group. Unfortunately, there's not that much that you can do, either as a whale or as a smaller indexer, other than trying to close your allocations on a more favorable rebate pool in a sense. So as a whale, you can, if you see there are many smaller indexers, you might want to avoid moving their staking efficiency a lot. And as a smaller indexer, if you saw that many whales have closed within the same rebate pool, you might want to reconsider and move the allocations, close your allocation on a different rebate pool. This is something that is not at all desirable, but it's one of the side effects of this production formula. So yeah, I think those are one of the things that we're keeping an eye on. I'm not entirely sure I understood the question correctly, Javry. Apologies for the silly question, but at the moment I set my allocations for the set of subgraphs we want to index. Will I get penalized or not earn optimal if I don't update those allocations after 28 epochs? If you don't close and reallocate after 28 epochs, you have like a bunch of things that could go wrong. The first of them is that someone else can close your allocations with a 0x0 POI, so you will be basically forfeiting your indexing rewards. You will also not be earning, rather, you will not be getting more multipliers on your effective allocation within the rebate pool when you close them after the 28 epochs, which is what Derek said a few moments ago. So yeah, ideally you have to close and reopen them after 28 epochs if you want to earn more optimally in a sense and not be at risk of getting closed on your allocations. But yeah, that's about it.
Cool. Do we have any other questions on the topic? See someone typing. I think it's Howard. So feel free to write in the chat or shout. Okay. Oh, did I hear someone unmute their mic?
Yeah, it's me. I want to say this is not something I've thought very much about. But yeah, I see also Howard is here, so he's probably someone who can give some insight into this. But the protocol is pretty complicated, and any opportunities we have to remove complexity, I think, are worthwhile. And I can recognize that the production function enforces some minimum bound, or certainly encourages some minimum bound for stake or I should say allocation size on a given deployment, and therefore economic security for any data that is served by that indexer. But a part of me kind of just wonders whether that should just be a function of the market. Like we already have the ISA, the indexer selection algorithm that runs on the gateway, and the ISA kind of matches consumers with indexers based on consumer preferences. And consumer preferences can kind of be across a range of things, but one of those is economic security. So a consumer can indicate to the gateway, hey, like I care about economic security on the data that I get back, or I don't. And then so you kind of just, I feel like that you could kind of just delegate all of that to the market, and it would, in some sense, I feel like it really puts some of the assumptions at the core of the protocol to test, which is like, how much do people actually care about economic security? Like, does the protocol need to enforce economic security? Or, and maybe you could argue that, when times are good, like developers or generally integrators, don't think about when times are bad. So it's a race to the bottom, right? People don't want to pay for economic security because they assume the data is good, or maybe the protocol does in fact need to enforce that. But it does strike me that you could just leave it to the market to indicate their preference and effectively for some price level to be found for a given level of economic security.
So leave it to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, is that what you're saying?
I don't know how, like, I
you know what I mean, though, right?
Can you unpack that?
Well, when you tend to leave humans alone to do these things themselves in markets, they tend to screw it up. That's the TLDR.
I mean, but you say that, but I think that's a good argument for market oversight and maybe even market intervention, which I know you and I both agree is like foundational to the crisis of our global financial system. Like, intervention is a problem.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, like, so if you look at some of the stuff we see at the moment on the query fee side of the market, some of these sort of inferences we're making around, oh well, you can actually steal milkshake in the Cobb-Douglas function. It's actually the data isn't bearing that out really at all at the moment. For example, there's big indexers out there who are making big claims, and other smaller indexers are making claims in the same pools, and the result is not the big indexer basically taking the entire rebate pool. It's like there's basically an average of rebate efficiency across the spectrum of, really good query fee indexers and average query fee indexers, and it's somewhere around like 50 to 75%, and it fluctuates. So at the moment, we're not seeing the security playing a major function in that rebate function. But the other part of it is, and I apologize, I'm very late. I just jumped in the last 10 minutes, but there's, the level of complexity and how that actually works and how to track it is part of the problem, right? How do you actually track that in the protocol? Like, what's going on in the pools every epoch is very, very difficult. It's easy to look at the Cobb-Douglas function on a piece in a spreadsheet and plug in a few different allocations and go, if I allocate more to that myself, then I can take more of the query fees and burn less of them overall. Or I can work with other indexers to burn less of the query fees. Because at the moment, I think we're burning like at least a third of the query fees every epoch, or every time someone claims, rather, we're burning at least 30% of the fees. So another deflationary lever on the protocol, but not one that we really want. So I think there's a lot of like data analysis work to be done here, right?
Yeah, I definitely, Jim. I think that the point that if you kind of, if you functionally leave the like reconciliation and like settlement of the market up to the gateway, then that just introduces a new level of black box, and that's definitely not good.
But also, your point is valid in that, the revenue process feels like a black box even now, right? So we need to speak to folks like Ricky and others who can dig into this sort of stuff and help us really understand if the function is doing its jobs correctly, and if not, how do we tweak things?
I mean, it depends on what you expect from the function doing its job correctly, in a sense. But because it is doing what it's told to be done, but we can always tweak that. So yeah, I guess it is true that there's a high burn rate on the current epochs. It really fluctuates. It really depends on the epoch. You might get an epoch that is a lot more efficient than other ones because the indexers that are closing within that epoch or closing allocations are all kind of like look like each other. So if that's the case, they are kind of like in the same ballpark of like staking efficiency. But if you get extreme cases where you have like one that has a lot of allocation, stake in the allocation, but a really low amount of query fees, and another one that has a high amount of query fees but a really low amount of allocation, you will get a higher burn. You can even see 50% burn on some rebate pools, but it really comes down to how averaged out or how much the allocations look alike in a sense.
Did you guys get to staking intensity?
We did, yeah.
Okay, cool.
I think we're at the top of the hour, Abel, just letting you know.
We are indeed. So, thank you all for today's conversation. It was certainly enlightening, very dense. We covered a lot. But before we do wrap up and let you all go, I want to hand it over to Chris to say a few words about the merge and what that means for all of us as indexers.
I'll keep it short and I think the biggest thing to say is like if you are expecting that this is just another hard fork, that's not the case. So please go do some research. In order to successfully navigate the merge, you will need to be running an existing execution layer client. So kind of the Ethereum 1 clients that we think of today are now called execution layer clients. You'll need to continue running that, but you'll also need to run another client, a consensus layer client, which is a beacon chain client. And you will need to connect these two together. So it's definitely worthwhile, having a play with this and maybe even syncing 𝗨𝗲 or Sepolia, both of which have merged. And there you can actually test the interop between the consensus layer client and the execution layer client. But yeah, there's a bit more work involved in this than usual, so please be aware of that and start preparing. The fork, the fork is due to execute not at a block number, but at the total terminal difficulty. So that's the proof of work difficulty that the network will effectively fork at. Current estimates place that at the 15th of September. So get ready. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. So you heard it there. Be prepared. Similar to the Cobb Douglas conversation, preparation is key. Thank you all for joining us on today's episode. We hope you learned something and had fun doing so. And we look forward to seeing you all next week when we discuss what it means to be a new indexer on the network. So look forward to seeing you all there. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. It's a good discussion as always.
Totally. Bye, everyone.